The night they never spoke about, rain was falling softly against the glass. As Keanu Reeves sat alone by the window of his hotel suite, the city below was glowing with neon lights and restless movement, but he wasn't paying attention. His thoughts were far away, caught somewhere between memory and regret. There was a night he had never spoken about, a night that changed everything between him and Sandra Bullock. It had been years since they first met. From the moment they shared the screen for the first time, people had sensed something between them, an energy too natural to be scripted, too real to be just acting. They laughed together easily, understood each other in ways words couldn't capture. But despite the closeness, they had always kept one unspoken rule: never cross the line. And yet, one night, they did. It happened during the filming of a charity documentary. Both were invited to narrate parts of it, and their schedules unexpectedly lined up. After a long day of shooting, Sandra had suggested they grab a late dinner, nothing fancy, just two friends catching up. But that night, something shifted. The restaurant was quiet, tucked away on a side street where no one recognized them. They talked for hours about their careers, their failures, the things they still dreamed about. Keanu found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about the loneliness of fame, about the people he had lost, about the fear that he would never find a place where he truly belonged. Sandra listened without interrupting, her eyes soft and full of understanding. And then she told him her own truths, about how she still doubted herself even after all her success, about the love she had given and lost, about the emptiness she sometimes felt when the cameras stopped rolling. By the time they left the restaurant, the rain had started again. They walked through the wet streets with no destination, laughing like children as they dodged puddles and shared stories from their earliest days in Hollywood. But somewhere between the jokes and the confessions, the air around them began to change. When they reached her hotel, Sandra hesitated. "Coming for a drink?" she asked, her voice light, but her eyes serious. Keanu paused. They had always been careful not to give the world anything to talk about, careful not to cross the line that could destroy their friendship. But that night, for reasons he couldn't explain, caution felt meaningless. "Just one," he said. Inside, the room was dim and quiet, the city lights casting soft shadows across the floor. They poured wine, talked more, laughed harder. The hours slipped away without either of them noticing. And then, sometime after midnight, the conversation fell into silence. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was something heavier, charged with everything they had never said. Sandra looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that had never been there before. "Can I tell you something?" she whispered. "Anything, I think. I've been lying to myself," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I keep telling myself that what we have is just friendship. But it's not. Not for me." Keanu's heart was pounding. He had told himself the same lie for years, convincing himself that their bond was too precious to risk. But now, hearing her say the words out loud, everything he had buried came rushing to the surface. "It's not just friendship for me either," he admitted. The room grew impossibly still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Sandra stepped closer. He could feel her breath, see the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. And in that heartbeat, Keanu understood that whatever happened next would change everything. When their lips finally met, it wasn't a kiss born out of passion. It was something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had hidden, everything they had denied. It was a confession without words, a promise neither of them dared to make. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, but inside that room, time seemed to stop. They stayed up until dawn, talking and laughing and holding each other in the quiet hours when the city slept. And though nothing more happened, that night was more intimate than anything either of them had ever known. But as the sun began to rise, reality crept back in. Sandra's phone buzzed with early morning calls. Keanu's driver was waiting downstairs, and with every passing minute, the weight of what they had done grew heavier. "This can't leave this room," Sandra said softly as she walked him to the door. "I know," he replied, "not because I regret it," she added quickly, "but because I don't want the world to ruin it." He nodded. "Then we'll keep it ours." And so they did. They never spoke about that night again, not in interviews, not to friends, not even to each other. But the memory of it lingered, tucked away like a secret they both carried alone. And though their friendship continued as before, something had undeniably changed. Because once a truth like that is spoken, once a line like that is crossed, you can never truly go back. And deep down, Both of them knew that the night they swore to forget was the one they would remember forever. Asterisk the silence that spoke louder than words for weeks after that night. Keanu and Sandra fell back into their usual rhythm, or at least, that's what they tried to do. They saw each other at industry events, exchanged messages about upcoming projects, even joked in interviews the way they always had. But beneath the surface, everything was different. The silence between them was no longer comfortable. It was charged, alive, pulsing with the memory of that night they swore never to mention. Every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of longing, a trace of fear, a question neither dared to ask. For Keanu, it was harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on discipline, on keeping his feelings separate from his work, on never letting emotion cloud his judgment. But now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. He remembered the way her voice had trembled when she said it wasn't just friendship. He remembered the way her head had rested against his chest as dawn broke, the way her heartbeat had matched his own. He had loved her quietly for so long. And now, that love no longer felt like a distant dream. It felt real. It felt possible. And that terrified him. Sandra was struggling too. She had told herself that nothing had changed, that what happened that night was a beautiful mistake, a fleeting moment of honesty between the people who cared deeply for each other. But every time she saw his name on her phone, her heart raced. Every time he smiled at her, she felt the urge to reach out, to take his hand, to say all the things she'd been too afraid to say. Yet neither of them did. They were actors. After all, masters of pretending. And so they pretended that the most important night of their lives had never happened. But pretending only works for so long. The first crack appeared a month later, at a private dinner for a film they were both supporting. It was a small gathering, just a few close friends and colleagues, but the energy between them was impossible to ignore. When Keanu arrived, Sandra was already there, laughing softly at a story someone was telling. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the noise faded. He walked over. "You look beautiful," he said simply. She smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." They stood there for a moment, too close, too aware, and then someone called her name and the moment was gone. But it left something behind, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the conversation shifted, Keanu found himself on the balcony, looking out over the city. The cool air was a relief from the suffocating tension inside. He was deep in thought when he heard soft footsteps behind him, escaping too. Sandra asked, stepping beside him, "Just needed some air." "Me too." They stood side by side in silence, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. It should have been easy, just two friends watching the night. But it wasn't. The air between them buzzed with everything unsaid. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked suddenly. He didn't need to ask what she meant. Every day, her breath caught. "Me too." There it was, the truth, spoken into the night air. And once again, silence followed. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy with possibility. "We said we wouldn't talk about it," she whispered. "We did, and yet here we are." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and in that moment, Keanu saw every emotion she had been trying to hide, the fear, the confusion, the longing. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that night wasn't a mistake." "No," she said softly, "it wasn't." The words hung in the air, uncomfortably real. For so long, they had hidden behind excuses, timing, careers, friendship, the fear of losing what they already had. But the truth was simple and undeniable. They loved each other, and pretending otherwise was becoming impossible. "So what do we do now?" she whispered. Keanu took a deep breath. "We stopped pretending." But before either of them could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Someone was coming. Sandra quickly stepped back, putting distance between them. When their friend appeared, smiling and asking if they were ready to leave, they both nodded as if nothing had happened. But everything had. That night, back in his hotel room, Keanu stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He knew the truth now, the truth he had been running from for years. He was in love with her, not the idea of her, not the memory of her, and he couldn't keep living like this, stuck between friendship and something deeper. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "We need to talk. No more running." He hesitated for a moment, then hit send, and on the other side of the city, Sandra's phone lit up in the darkness. She stared at the message for a long time, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Then she typed back, "Yes, it's time." Neither of them knew what would happen next. But they both knew this. The night they had tried to forget was no longer a memory. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could stop. Asterisk the conversation that changed everything next evening. The city was wrapped in a soft haze of twilight when Sandra arrived at the small cafe Keanu had chosen. It was quiet, tucked away on a tree-lined street far from the flashing cameras and curious eyes. He was already there, sitting by the window with 2 cups of tea on the table, just like he used to when they were filming together years ago. Their eyes met the moment she walked in. There was no small talk, no polite smiles. They both knew this wasn't going to be just another conversation. This was the one they had avoided for years, and now there was no turning back. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hi," he replied, his voice equally quiet. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stared at each other, the silence filled with 1,000 unsaid words. It was Sandra who broke it first. "I almost didn't come. I was afraid you wouldn't. But then I realized," she whispered, "I've been running from this for too long." Keanu nodded slowly. "So have I." She looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin between her fingers. "That night, I keep replaying it in my head. Every word, every second. And no matter how much I try to convince myself it didn't mean anything, it did. It meant everything. It did for me too," he said, his voice low but steady. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Then why didn't we talk about it? Why did we pretend?" "Because we were scared," he admitted. "Because we built something so strong as friends, and we didn't want to risk losing it. But the truth is, I was losing myself every time I pretended I didn't feel more." Her breath caught. "You felt more?" "I've always felt more," he confessed. "From the first day on set. I told myself it was just admiration, then friendship, then something deeper. But I kept burying it. And that night, when you said it wasn't just friendship, I finally felt like I wasn't alone." Sandra's hands trembled in her lap. Her heart was racing faster than she could control. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, it felt too real, too raw. "Keanu," she whispered, "I love you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Once they were out, she felt both terrified and freed. Keanu froze. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, and the silence stretched long enough for doubt to creep in. But then he reached across the table and took her hand gently in his. "I love you too," he said, his voice trembling. "I think I've loved you for a very long time." Tears welled in her eyes. But they weren't from sadness. They were from the overwhelming weight of finally being seen, finally being known. For the first time, there was no pretending, no careful distance, just the people, stripped of everything but the truth. But love, real love, rarely comes without complications. And as they sat there, basking in the relief of their shared confession, the world outside was already stirring. Their secret night had not been as secret as they thought. Someone at the restaurant that evening months ago had taken a photo of Keanu, walking into her hotel late at night and leaving at dawn. And now, that photo had found its way to the tabloids. The next morning, the internet exploded. Headlines screamed across social media. "Keanu and Sandra's midnight rendezvous, more than friends?" Reporters camped outside their homes. Fans flooded their accounts. And every talk show host in the country had an opinion. Sandra's single quotes as phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her publicist begged her to issue a statement. "Deny it. Say it was nothing. We can spin this," they said. But how could she deny something that was finally real? Keanu showed up at her door, holding the newspaper with the photo on the front page. "We knew this might happen," he said quietly. "I thought we'd have more time," she whispered. "Me too." They sat down on the couch, the paper between them, both staring at it like it was some kind of living thing. "What do we do now?" she asked. Keanu looked at her with the calm steadiness she had always loved about him. "We tell the truth. No more hiding. No more pretending. If this is real, and I believe it is, then we face it together." Her chest tightened with both fear and relief. Together, the following day, they released a joint statement. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was simple, honest, and exactly who they were. "We have been close friends for many years. Recently, that friendship has grown into something deeper. We ask for kindness and privacy as we navigate this new chapter of our lives." The reaction was explosive. Some fans cheered, others speculated endlessly. The media dissected every word. But amid the noise, there was a powerful silence. The silence of two people who no longer had anything to hide. And yet, even as they stepped into the light, challenges loomed. Offers for interviews poured in. Scripts arrived with the condition that they'd star together. Companies wanted them as their couple. Suddenly, their love was no longer just theirs. It was a spectacle. And as the pressure mounted, one question hung over them like a shadow. Could their bond, born from honesty and vulnerability, survive the glare of the world? Because love wasn't just about finding each other. It was about holding on when the world tried to pull them apart. And that test was about to begin. Asterisk, when the world found out. World had always loved the idea of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Fans had written stories about them, created montages of their movie moments, and speculated endlessly about their connection. But now that their relationship was real, no longer a rumor or a fantasy, the fascination became relentless. The morning after their statement, Sandra woke up to find a swarm of photographers outside her house. Helicopters circled above. Her phone was flooded with interview requests, brand deals, scripts, and public appearances. What had once been private and sacred was now public property. Keanu tried to shield her from it. "Don't read the comments," he said gently as they sat together on her couch. "Don't watch the shows. None of that matters." But it was impossible to ignore. Hollywood's most unexpected love story. One headline read, "Will it last or crash?" Asked another, "Is this a publicity stunt?" A gossip host sneered on TV. The scrutiny was suffocating. Even simple dinners became headline news. When they were spotted walking hand in hand through a park, tabloids labeled it a strategic photo op. When they skipped an award show, reporters speculated about a breakup. It felt like every breath they took was analyzed, twisted, and sold. For Sandra, the pressure was heavier. She had always been fiercely protective of her private life. Now, strangers dissected her choices, questioned her motives, and debated her worthiness. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said one night, her voice trembling as they sat in her kitchen long after midnight. Keanu looked up sharply. "Don't say that. I can't even walk to my car without a camera in my face," she whispered. "People are dragging up every relationship I've ever had, every word I've ever said. They're calling me desperate, calling you foolish. It's like our happiness is something they're trying to destroy." He reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture that had always grounded them. "I don't care what they say. None of it changes how I feel about you, but maybe it changes how you see me," she said softly. He shook his head. "Sandra, look at me." She did. His eyes were steady, unwavering. "You are the most honest, compassionate, strong person I've ever known. You make me want to be better. You always have. And if the price of being with you is a few cameras and some nasty comments, I'll pay it 1,000 times over." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. "You mean that?" Every word. They leaned across the table and kissed, soft and slow, like a promise. But the outside pressure wasn't the only challenge they faced. Their relationship was beginning to affect their careers too. Producers worried they'd be too distracting on set together. Some studios tried to use their relationship as a marketing tool, pushing projects that neither of them truly believed in. And when Sandra turned down a major role because she wanted to spend more time with Keanu, the industry labeled her unfocused and emotional. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings, they sat on the balcony of Keanu's apartment, watching the city lights. "Are we doing the right thing?" Sandra asked quietly. "Loving each other?" "No." Holding on this tightly, Keanu thought about it. "Love isn't supposed to be easy," he said finally. "If it is, it's probably not real. But the hard parts, the doubt, the pressure, the noise, that's how you know it's worth fighting for." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then we fight. We fight," he echoed. But the world wasn't finished testing them. A few weeks later, Sandra was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award at a prestigious gala. Keanu was supposed to be by her side, a public show of unity. But on the morning of the event, an unexpected emergency changed everything. His sister, who had been battling health issues quietly for years, was suddenly hospitalized. Keanu dropped everything and rushed to be with her. He called Sandra, his voice heavy with guilt. "I can't make it tonight." "Don't even think about it," she said firmly. "Your family comes first. Always." But the media didn't see it that way. Headlines the next day were brutal. Keanu skipped Sandra's big night. Cracks already showing? Trouble in paradise? Sandra smiled for the cameras and delivered her speech, but inside, she felt the sting of their absence. Not his, never his, but the world's cruelty when Keanu showed up at her door 2 days later. Exhausted and still wearing the same clothes, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him and held him tight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said. "You were where you needed to be." He pulled back and looked at her, his eyes full of love and something deeper, resolve. "We're stronger than this," he said. "We are," she agreed. But even as they clung to each other, the next storm was already forming. A new rumor began circulating, one that threatened not just their relationship, but their reputations. Someone from their past was about to come forward with a story, and whether it was true or not, the damage could be devastating, because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against the world. They're fought against the ghosts of the past, and theirs was about to resurface. Asterisk the past that came knocking. It started with a headline, one that made Sandra's stomach drop the moment she saw it. Exclusive: Woman from Keanu's past tells all. Beneath it was a photo of a face she didn't recognize. The article was vague, but vicious, filled with insinuations, half-truths, and dangerous suggestions about Keanu's past. It claimed that years ago, before his career had skyrocketed, he had been involved in a complicated relationship that ended badly, one that, according to the source, left emotional scars. There was no evidence, no proof, just stories twisted into something scandalous. But the damage was immediate. Suddenly, talk shows were speculating about who the woman was. Journalists dug into every corner of Keanu's private life. Online forums exploded with theories. And worst of all, people began to question if the man Sandra loved was hiding something from her. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just gossip, the kind that always swirled around celebrities. But late one night, when Keanu hadn't come home and her calls went unanswered, doubt crept in. When he finally walked through the door, hours later than expected, she was waiting. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. He sighed, his shoulders heavy. "I met with her, the woman from the article." "Yeah, her name is Claire." He sat down, running a hand through his hair. "We were together a long time ago. It ended badly, not because of anything dramatic, just because we weren't good for each other. But now she's decided she wants attention, and the media is eating it up. Is there any truth to what she said?" Sandra asked. Keanu looked up, his eyes steady. "Some of it. We fought a lot. I wasn't perfect, but I never hurt her, never betrayed her. I walked away because it was toxic for both of us." Sandra nodded slowly, but her heart was still racing. "Why didn't you tell me about her before?" "Because it didn't matter," he said. "Until now, it was just a closed chapter in a book I never wanted to reopen." She turned away, staring out the window. "But now the world thinks it defines you." "It doesn't," he said gently. "And it doesn't define us either, unless we let it." But the storm was far from over. A few days later, Claire sold another story, this time claiming that Keanu had made promises he never kept, that he had abandoned her during a difficult time. Again, there was no proof, but the narrative caught fire. The public started turning. Online, people questioned his integrity. His upcoming projects faced backlash, and for the first time, Sandra saw something she had never seen in him before: doubt. One evening, as they sat in the dark living room, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Maybe you'd be better off without me." Her head snapped up. "Don't you dare say that." "I'm serious," he whispered. "Look at what this is doing to you, to your career. I don't want to be the reason everything you've worked for falls apart." She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "Listen to me. I don't love you because the world approves of you. I don't love you because of who they think you are. I love you because of who you are to me. The man who shows up, the man who listens, the man who held my hand when I was falling apart. That's the man I know." His eyes glistened in the dim light. "And what if the world never sees that?" "Then we show them," she said firmly. Together, the next day, they did something neither of them had ever done before. They sat down for a joint interview. Not a promotional one, not a scripted talk show appearance, but an honest, raw conversation. They spoke about their relationship, about the challenges they had faced, about the pain of living under constant scrutiny. And when the interviewer brought up Claire, Keanu addressed it directly. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I'm not proud of everything in my past, but none of that changes the man I am now. And none of it changes the love I feel for Sandra." It was one of the most watched interviews of the year. Some people still doubted, Some still clung to the scandal, but many saw something they hadn't expected: vulnerability, honesty, and a love that refused to crumble under pressure. But as the media noise slowly began to fade, a new complication emerged, one far more personal, far more real. Sandra had been feeling unwell for weeks. At first, she brushed it off as stress, but when the nausea became unbearable and the fatigue overwhelming, she decided to see a doctor. The news she received shook her to the core. She was pregnant. When she told Keanu, his reaction was a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Positive," she whispered. They sat there in silence, the weight of what this meant settling around them. This wasn't just about them anymore. This wasn't just about love or scandal or public opinion. This was about a life, a future, growing quietly between them. "This changes everything," Keanu said softly. "Yes," Sandra whispered, her hand resting gently on her stomach. "But maybe it's the beginning of something we were always meant to have." And as they sat there, holding each other in the quiet, they both knew that the biggest chapter of their story was still ahead. The beginning of forever. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains, painting the room with a soft golden glow. Sandra sat quietly by the window, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Everything felt different now. The world outside still buzzed with headlines and speculation, but none of that mattered anymore. There was something far bigger than fame or scandal growing quietly inside her. Something that would change both their lives forever. Keanu walked in, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, holding a small envelope in his hand. He sat beside her without a word, his hand automatically finding hers. For a few moments, they just sat there, breathing in the silence together. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. "Scared," she admitted. "Happy," overwhelmed, all at once. He smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Me too." They hadn't told anyone yet. Not the press, not their friends, not even their families. It was their secret, one last piece of their lives untouched by the world's noise. But the reality of what was coming was beginning to settle in. Doctor's appointments, decisions about work, conversations about the future. And with it came a flood of doubts. "Do you ever think we're not ready?" she asked quietly. "Every second," he said honestly. "But I also think we'll figure it out together." She let out a shaky laugh. "Together. That's the word that keeps me going." "Good," he said, squeezing her hand. "Because there's no version of this future where I'm not by your side." Weeks passed, and their world slowly shifted from chaos to calm. The tabloids eventually moved on to the next big story. Claire disappeared from the headlines. The noise faded into the background, and in that newfound silence, Keanu and Sandra began building something real. They started small, late-night talks about baby names, plans for the nursery, nervous laughter over parenting books. They attended appointments together, holding hands tightly as they watched the tiny heartbeat flicker on the screen for the first time. Keanu cried quietly when he heard it, and Sandra held his face in her hands, smiling through her own tears. "That's us," she whispered. "That's our story." But life, as it always does, continued to test them. The pregnancy wasn't easy. There were days when Sandra was too exhausted to get out of bed, days when the fear of losing control overwhelmed her. The stress of balancing public life and private change weighed heavily. And through it all, Keanu never left her side. He learned how to cook her favorite meals when the cravings hit. He read books on parenting late into the night. He whispered words of comfort on the night she cried, terrified of the unknown. "We're going to be okay," he'd say softly, over and over, until she believed it. As months turned into seasons, something else changed too. Their love. It deepened, softened, matured. What had once been a secret, fragile connection born from a single night now felt like a bond forged in fire. They had weathered storms, faced rumors, endured judgment, and now, on the other side of it all, they stood stronger than ever. One evening, 6 months into the pregnancy, Keanu asked her to go for a walk. They ended up at the same quiet park where they had taken some of their first steps together. As a couple, the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. He stopped by a small bench overlooking the lake and turned to face her. "Do you remember the first time we talked about what we wanted from life?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "You said you just wanted peace, and I said I just wanted to feel safe." He nodded. "And now I think we're both finding that with each other." She felt tears sting her eyes. "Yeah, we are." Keanu took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket. When he dropped to one knee, Sandra's breath caught. "Sandra," he began, his voice shaking but steady. "We've been through everything, storms, lies, pressure, fear, and every single time, we came out stronger. You are my peace, you are my safety, and I don't want to build this family, this future, without you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks before she could even speak. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger as she pulled him into a trembling embrace. Beneath the stars, with the sound of the city far in the distance and the gentle beat of a new life inside her, they promised forever. The months that followed were a blur of preparation and anticipation. They decided to keep their wedding small, just family and a few close friends. It wasn't about glamour or headlines. It was about them, on a quiet spring afternoon, beneath an arch of white roses and soft music. They exchanged vows. Keanu's voice trembled as he spoke. "I promise to love you even when the world feels heavy. I promise to stand beside you even when it's hard. And I promise that every step of this journey, every late-night feeding, every tear, every laugh, I will be here." Sandra's voice broke as she replied, "I promise to believe in us when doubt tries to creep in. I promise to love the man you are, not the image the world sees. And I promise that no matter how life changes, I will always choose you." When they kissed, it wasn't the dramatic kiss of a movie ending. It was something deeper, a seal on a story that had been written slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. Months later, they welcomed a baby girl into the world. They named her Grace, not because it was trendy or poetic, but because Grace was what had carried them through it all. Keanu held her in his arms, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "You're the best thing we've ever done." Sandra, exhausted but glowing, smiled as she watched them together. "No," she whispered, "we are." And so, the story that began with a secret night neither of them planned became something much greater. A love that weathered storms, overcame fear, defied expectations, and built a life rooted in trust, respect, and unbreakable connection. It was never about the fame or the rumors or the noise. It was about the people who found home in each other and built a family that would carry their story forward long after the cameras stopped rolling. Because in the end, their greatest secret wasn't that night long ago. It was the life they created from it, a love strong enough to last forever.